Welcome to our show, AdAstra With. Today we have the incredible privilege of having Hans Koenigsmann on the show for a great conversation spanning the transformation of the new space industry, perspectives on leadership, career growth, team building, and the delicate balance of mitigating risk versus pushing the boundaries in new space. Plus, we may have some bonus topics if we have time.
Alrighty, well, something tells me that the vast majority of our audience already knows who you are, Hans.
Yeah.
But for those of you that don't, in 2002, Hans came from being the chief scientist at Microcosm to being the fourth employee at SpaceX.
Wow.
He was VP of Avionics for 10 years before transitioning to VP of Build and Flight Reliability for 9 years. In 2021, he remained a senior advisor to SpaceX before semi-retiring. Key there, semi. Hans is now an advisor and board member to several companies in the space industry. We're honored to have you on the show today, Hans.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thank you.
I also have to throw in there that we have a lot of friends from SpaceX and just in the new space industry in general. And whenever we mentioned that we were getting to do a show with you, people just speak about you with a lot of respect and a lot of love. So
right, thank you.
Very well loved in the industry. Quick introduction about Brian and myself. For those of you who don't know us yet, I'm very passionate about humans and the synergistic effects of thriving teams, Earth, and advanced space technology. And I'm so lucky to get to interact with all of those on a daily basis as founder and CEO of AdAstra, where we do executive and technical headhunting for the professionals leading new space and clean tech startups. And I'm also a student pilot. And Hans, you're a pilot as well.
Yep.
So that's a
Exactly.
fun commonality.
How much time do you have?
Yeah, right.
I'm a little envious over here, but happy for you both. And I'm Brian. My background's in aerospace engineering, bachelor's and master's from Michigan in aerospace before working at SpaceX for about 6-7 years, primarily as a propulsion engineer. Then I went to an early stage startup in the Bay for a little bit before starting AdAstra, where I'm our COO and CTO. So anyway, that's enough about me, and let's get into it.
Yeah.
Right.
So Hans, starting at SpaceX, like everybody knows SpaceX now, but when you were employee for, did it feel like a sure thing?
No, not at all. It was kind of weird because I was not at a good spot at the time. I was kind of, I don't want to say bored, but looking for other avenues.
Yeah.
And I was actually even looking back at Europe, and I might have gone back to Germany or Europe at the time if I had a good opportunity. And then Elon came along, and Elon had a couple of things that fit right into what I'm thinking there. So first of all, he had there was funding. There was no fighting for rounds and rounds and rounds of funding and stuff like that. And it was a clean shot, and we all we had to do is just basically convert the money into rockets. Yeah,
Easier said than done.
That's all you need to do, right? And we had a certain time for that, and we had a really great team, and Elon would basically help us doing this by getting us all the tools we need and all the things we need for that. And I kind of like the simplicity. It was just what I always wanted, that somebody just comes along and here's the resources and go build this and not this back and forth what you usually have in funding, and especially on the science side, it's way more than on the engineering side. It often takes more time to get the money than actually build what you actually want to build.
Yeah. How wild to look back right now and seeing how much you've impacted the new space industry and think we almost lost you back to Germany.
No, I don't know. Somebody else would have done it, in my opinion. It's just at the end of the day, the chance or the opportunity was greater than the people, in my opinion, almost, because we just learned so much by how we did and what we did. And yes, there are. I mean, Elon hired great people, in the beginning, and the team was really great, working well together. We were all a really good fit. He hired essentially a handful of experienced people that don't have too much experience.
Yeah,
that's sweet spot.
So exactly, not people that worked at whatever, a launch company for 15 years or so, but people that worked for at launch companies a little bit. People from other areas, people from different places, and then mixed them together. And then we went out and hired people pretty much, at the time, straight from college because those were the people that wanted to work at startups.
Yeah.
It was hard to find somebody, and then I was always a little bit amused. I would say people would come in and they had like whatever 15 years experience, and they would look around and say, "Oh, this is startup, risky," and so on and so forth. And although we told them we basically have the funding.
Right.
Didn't believe you.
Yes. Well, I don't know. Or maybe they just didn't take us into account. And then years later, when SpaceX was large and needed a lot of money, that's a totally different game. Then people would come in and say, "Oh, you guys have funding and everything is safe for me." And I go, "No, this is just the inverse." Yeah.
Yeah.
At the beginning, you actually had time. I mean, obviously, it could not. There's people that didn't work out, and the type of work would not be for everybody. Yeah. And you would have to work very hard in the first couple of years. Actually, in all the years.
I was like, did that change somewhere? Not my experience.
It was actually, yes, it did change.
Yeah.
It was always hard, but it was really hard in the first 5 years. Maybe, yeah.
I believe that.
Yeah. So it's not for everybody, but like I said, it was hard to find people at the beginning. So we grew very slowly. I think at the first year, the end, you were basically, I don't know, little over 2 dozen maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe 2 dozen, something like that. And then when I look back, and today we're thousands, right? That's
Yeah.
a serious number of magnitudes.
Yeah. And how did you and Elon get hooked up at that time?
We just ran into each other at an amateur rocket weekend, and we just shook hands basically and decided to talk.
Yeah.
And then we did talk a little bit later, and then at one point in time, I do remember the phone call coming in, and he just called me if I'd be interested, and I pretty much did not hesitate at all.
Yeah.
So I just thought, this is awesome.
Yeah.
I want that. Yeah. To be fair, I wasn't really too much into Mars at the time.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, this kind of like grew over time.
Yeah.
At the beginning, I was more interested in, let's see how many people we need to build a rocket. Yeah.
Yeah.
This has been something that before us used thousands of people, and then 10,000 of people, and then maybe less. In the decade before that, and then we are looking at 100, 200 people, or something like that.
Yeah.
So the challenge was totally different. Yeah. The challenge was more like all these things. We have the tools now, and we have better equipment, and we have better technology. Can we do this with a lot less effort than it used to be?
Yeah.
That was basically my angle at the time. And then over time, it did change into, okay, we should use that opportunity to go to Mars.
Yeah.
So now I'm pretty firm on the Mars team.
Yeah.
But at the beginning, it took a while for me. And it's also, I always said that a couple of times. If you would mention Mars in Germany, people would just look at you and laugh, maybe.
It was thought to be a silly idea.
Yeah, exactly.
Or okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. Wow.
You would not be taken very serious.
Yeah.
I think it might still be like
that was gonna be my next
Just
question.
too ambitious, or not the smartest decision?
Well, it's like nobody has done that so far, right? So,
Right.
So why want to do? Why do you want to do it?
Yeah. And so looking back now, it shows up to us that in a lot of ways, SpaceX started the new space industry. Is that how it shows up for you?
So there were attempts of starting new space before that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Definitely. But nothing was as profound and really influential as SpaceX was. SpaceX by far the one that was most influential, and SpaceX, in my opinion, was also the one that did it right.
Yeah.
Because it starts with launcher. It starts with access to space, and that's so. Elon very logically looked at the problem and said, okay, where's the problem? Okay, the problem is with the launcher. Let's build a launcher. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's wrong with the launcher? Well, it's the cost. Well, let's see if we can lower the cost. Yeah.
Yeah.
And how do we do this? What's the most logical thing is obviously you throw the thing away after each flight. So let's work on that. Yeah.
Right.
It's when you look back, it's like a sequence of logical decisions. And most people working at SpaceX are pretty logical.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's been wild to see December 2015 when that first rocket came back.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
just how rapidly the growth in the industry has progressed from that time.
Yeah, that was the first that actually came back successfully and landed
Right.
up straight so that you could take it somewhere else.
Yeah.
There were a few that landed before and then they ended up in boxes. But yeah, it was a long way to get there, obviously. And it was great when that actually happened on I think it was December 21 or so.
Yeah.
2015. Great day.
So we love the story of when Brian was in grad school at Michigan, he had somebody come into his aerospace class who gave a whole presentation about why SpaceX wasn't going to work because it was impossible.
Oh, I love those people.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? And
Yeah, nothing good can come from the projections like that, obviously.
yeah.
It was guised as how to design a rocket or how to, he was a former rocket designer, but it quickly turned into the whole presentation being about how reusability in rockets will never work, and this was in 2013 or 2014.
So it wasn't even that far from true success, right?
It took a long time for people. I still think there's people still convinced that that's the case right now.
Yeah.
Because there's still rockets being built that are not reusable.
Yeah.
Right. So by definition, there got to be people that believe the other way works better.
Yeah.
Right. To be fair, it's difficult to build a reusable
Right.
rocket.
Yeah.
And you can argue that there are stepping stones, but it's so much harder to put to change the design later and adopt it to reusability rather than trying to solve the problem from the get-go.
Yeah.
So it also makes the investment costs are pretty high for rockets typically, and it makes the investment cost even higher when you look at reusability.
Yeah.
But it is what it is. I always have this example of like you have knife and a fork and their reusability, right?
Right.
And life is over for the non-reusable knife and forks once you have a reusability knife and fork, right?
Right.
And you will not buy the other ones except for special cases like you throw them away
Right.
after the party or something like that. Yeah. So there's still maybe a niche for silverware, but I don't think there's for rockets in that sense.
Yeah.
And that's just I think that thought slowly starts to come true. Where people realize, the market actually goes going to the ones that are half the cost for now and probably even less in the long run. Yeah. And that realization will come sooner or later and change the industry.
Yeah. That's incredible. And that I really like that analogy. And so you, SpaceX, you were marching towards these goals that a lot of people thought were ludicrous, right?
Yeah.
And I guess, are there any fun examples of directions that we may not know of, that goals that you had that ended up not to be correct? Because we know a lot of the ones that ended up being a great idea.
I mean, yeah, we did try several things, and one strength of SpaceX is when we go one way and we find out it doesn't work because it doesn't work, then we back out and do another way. Right? I mean, like the original stages had parachutes, for example,
right?
Yeah? And the idea was to wait for the stage to come into denser atmosphere and pop the parachute. We later found out that by that time the stage is in pieces, and the parachute would only bring down like a little piece of it.
Yeah.
But there's examples of that. The other thing that I also thought was going back to like people believing it or not was interesting was people were really slow. People are slow in changing their mind.
Yeah.
Like you see this working the first time, they go, "Oh, they had success on the first flight," for example.
Right.
They go, "Well, they're lucky."
Yeah.
And then the second one goes up and go, "Oh, they're really lucky."
Yeah.
And then we built. We stopped after 5 flights or 5 attempts rather on Falcon 1 and switched over to Falcon 9. And Falcon 9 flew. And go, wow, these people are really lucky, or maybe they're even good.
Right.
So that process was so slow in general, yeah. And the same is true for the reusability. I mean, you could see that the rocket comes down, tries to land, and the landing, obviously, landing on the drone ship, as we called it, is basically a barge, which is the size of, I don't know what the size, maybe 2 tennis fields or something like that.
Yeah.
It's tiny. It's tiny for a rocket. You can see this on the camera. You go down, where is it landing? And then as it goes really down, you finally see the little speck in the ocean right where it lands. And so doing this is obviously difficult. that doesn't mean that it's fundamentally difficult to do the reusability and everything else. It was just one element that we made extra hard because we landed on this tiny little thing, right?
Yeah.
And so when it went wrong the first couple of times, people took that as confirmation of that, when it really was actually, I guess, a distraction, more or less. Yeah.
Yeah.
We had to do this because we didn't want the impact on land every time.
Right.
Right. And
the footage from those videos were just incredible.
Great, yeah. It's still great. That's true. Yeah, that's true. And we didn't want to buy or rent a huge ship, right?
Right.
So we did what we thought was the minimum.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I said, it takes long for people to actually change their mind.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's it's so fun to hear of some of those ideas, like the parachute, right? Yeah. Like, let's try it and then we'll learn from it and be able to adjust.
I mean, fundamentally, the parachute, if you slow down enough, like we do on the entry burn, basically, the parachute might still have benefit. Parachutes on the other side are not super simple, and we learned that on Dragon too, that parachutes are complicated devices, I would say, not totally fully analyzable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you got to be careful with the parachutes too. So I think the way we land right now, or the way SpaceX lands right now, is the better way of doing things.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's so cool. Very, very neat. And Hans, you've led impressive teams of engineers. What can you share with us about your leadership philosophy?
It's a good question. I actually, I actually don't have. I never went through leadership school, so I'm obviously
School
completely
of Hard Knocks, maybe.
No, completely uneducated on this whole thing. So, all right. I had a couple of principles. I come in first, I go last. Coming in first was hard at the beginning. I may go last, or something like that. So I don't expect people to work more than I do, and I don't know. Trying to understand people that work for me, how they work and where they need room, and try to give them the room. Yeah.
Yeah.
I learned my lessons there too. Sometimes people don't always tell you what they think.
Yeah.
Obviously, yeah, and you may want to look at behavior more than at what they say. In the beginning, I think it was relatively easy because the team was small and they knew everybody personally, and I still know them personally, right? And for some reason, we ended up with a great team.
Yeah.
And so it was easy to just cooperate and work with them. And later on, it was a little bit harder when you get to a layered hierarchy, basically. That's when it gets difficult. That's when you actually have to communicate a little bit better.
Yeah.
That's when you have to say, okay, I think this is important, and and I don't know. I don't play any games there.
Yeah.
And that maybe that's the one thing that I don't do. I pretty much say what I think.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's no filter. That's not good. Sometimes there should be a little bit of a filter, but fundamentally, being just authentic to yourself.
Yeah.
And listen to people is strategy. I don't think that's necessarily great advice, I guess.
I think listening to people and being authentic, I mean, that's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
I think you would learn that in leadership school. So
I don't know. I never had any and there are books too, and I can't get. I mean, these books are either too long or whatever they are. You can't fill a book with like something that goes on 2 pages.
Yeah.
Right. And so I don't finish them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, what you're talking about, coming in first and leaving last at SpaceX, like that, where there's a very intense culture of working.
Yeah, the coming in first was more desire than a fact at the end of the day. But yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, people work super hard, and you gotta honor that somehow.
Yeah. That's incredible. Being in that environment from the beginning of SpaceX, you know, I mean, you've seen it through for so much of its success and growth. That requires a lot of energy, right? People are working really hard.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. It didn't change that much actually in my mind. Yeah, I mean, we added processes and things that companies do, right? But they were still pretty straightforward, and there's still more to the point of, all right, how are we doing that? Or how do we want this to be done? Yeah. Not how is this done usually, but rather what's the best way for us to do this, and that's what the process later turns into, right? And so I feel like it's still pretty authentic SpaceX up to this day.
Yeah.
And we're still a bunch of it's a really good engineering shop, right?
Yeah.
And so we're still really good in engineering, and they're still super cautious, right? I can still see this. Otherwise, you would not be as successful on the launches as SpaceX is.
Yeah.
It's pretty clear that that there's still the rigor driving the company.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. It's funny when we're interviewing people and when we're looking for people for startups, it really helps to get people who've come from a startup, right? They understand that energy.
True. I mean, I see a lot of startups. I mean, there's one effect of SpaceX is obviously people leave SpaceX and then the startup things that they always wanted to do.
Yeah.
Or the idea happened maybe at SpaceX, whatever it is. And then the spirit how SpaceX works keeps on living there too.
Yeah.
I see that too. I still see the focus on the mission. I still see the rigor. I see like the pragmatic way, I guess, to some extent. Yeah. Actually, I'm pretty pragmatic too. So maybe that helps too. So all these things that I saw at SpaceX, I see in other companies too. Not to sometimes a stronger and lesser degree, depending on who it is. Yeah, and not everybody leaving SpaceX is the same. Yeah, I mean, there's people are different.
Right.
So obviously, but fundamentally, it kind of like spawned these companies that are all very similar, and I think that is where the progress for the industry is too.
Yeah. No kidding. That's so true. In order to work in that high energy, high demand, high performance environment, what sort of practices do you have in your daily life to keep your mind and body operating at that high energy?
I don't know. I mean, I manage pretty well in a way that I would work through a stretch and then come home and spend some time with the family.
Yeah.
And then potentially go back later on again. And I didn't feel like it was that much of well, I actually enjoy it. To be true, I did enjoy working on that. The problem was actually with me somewhat. Yeah, it was not something that somebody tells me, "Oh, you got to solve this problem." But no, I need to solve this problem.
Yeah.
It's my own thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I own this problem, and so I was taking that seriously.
Yeah.
And so that helps you obviously to get through the work, but then you also have to look at the other aspect that. Well, I had a young daughter most of the time, and so I got to spend time with her. I took her to work sometimes.
Yeah.
She loves it too. So you got to balance that a little bit.
Yeah. Find
and
that
I don't
balance.
think I'm not sure I did a great balance at the end of the day, but I think it worked out okay. Many years later, I found after I left SpaceX, I basically needed just some time to do nothing.
Yeah.
Or to do other things a little bit. Yeah. And then I started more workouts and stuff like that. I did do this during SpaceX too.
Yeah.
Like I would always run on the weekends and then maybe on one day in the week or something like that. Yeah. And I keep that routine still.
Yeah.
Just running helps me a little bit to clear my head.
Yeah.
And whether it's running or yoga or whatever, this doesn't matter.
Right. Yeah. Right. Keeping having that exercise element. And then what I also really liked about what you were saying is, frankly, it sounds like your work was also energizing you, right? So it wasn't a drain.
Yeah, I didn't think, I mean, there might have been times where it's negative stress, but many times it was not negative stress for me. It was positive stress.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
Was it self-motivation, do you think, that had you feeling that way most of the time? Or?
Yeah, mostly. I don't think I need a lot of motivation, frankly. I mean, I see we need to get this rocket fixed, right? And there's this problem over here. So okay, we fix it.
Right.
Yeah. Have you always been self-motivated in previous roles before?
I think so too.
Yeah.
I think so too. It's it runs into problems when somebody tells me I should be motivated on this problem rather than that problem, right? But actually, honestly, I don't recall that very often.
Yeah.
I was always pretty self-motivated and had always bosses that would let me do that.
Yeah.
Maybe they would add something here or there or something like that. In long time, SpaceX, Gwyn was my boss, Gwyn Shotwell. And Gwyn and I go way back before SpaceX.
Oh, cool.
So it was easy that part. And if you have a relationship, outside work too, then you get to the point of where you can just pick up the phone and say, hey, I need you to do this. And there's no discussion, right? I just do it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Speaking of business relationships, what are some non-negotiables for you in building strong business relationships?
Well, okay, I can tell you from my current perspective, I don't give any contact information inside SpaceX ever.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't do that.
So, like, if someone contacts you,
somebody contacts, hey, you have Elon's phone number? No.
Yeah.
I don't. Can I call Gwyn? No.
Yeah.
So I mean, that as outside SpaceX, it's different.
Yeah.
And I call people. Do you want to talk to this person? I said okay. But I feel like that's more necessary. But inside SpaceX, never ever.
And that's a motive to protect their time and privacy.
Yeah, I think that's what they want.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want this SpaceX either.
Yeah.
That people just call me from the outside because somebody gave them my phone number, right? I want to know what I'm talking about primarily. I don't do networking per se.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just feel like I don't network for the purpose of network.
Right.
That's pretty. I think that's somewhat useless.
Yeah.
And so somebody needs to have a reason. And I ask, why do you want to talk?
Yeah.
And then it has to be something where I say, okay, this is worth my time. Otherwise, I kind of like fool myself and the other person too. I pretend I want to talk, and then after half an hour, I just go, look, I'm not into whatever lithium.
Yeah. Right. Understanding both motivations.
Yeah, and there's lots of people that want to talk to you, and it has nothing to do with what you want. They have only half information of you.
Right.
And so it clearly doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Let's see. I'm also at a little bit different point where I used to be. So I guess how I treat business relations right now is different than what I would recommend. Yeah.
Okay.
In that sense, I would always let people talk and listen for a while, and then prior to that.
Yeah.
For now, I just don't need to do that anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, you are such a wealth of knowledge, and there's so much about your career that I want to help share with the audience who.
Yes, actually, I thought about that too. Yeah. There's no plan.
Yeah.
Yeah. and there was no. I mean, I see people making plans for that too, right?
Yeah.
This and this and this, and then. But to be fair, I just when I finished school, I was pretty much the last year of it, I was working on a satellite. Okay. And it was a cool thing in Germany at the time because nobody else was working on a satellite in school.
Yeah.
And so when I got out of college, when I got out of college, the first job that came along building a satellite, I thought, okay, this is it. Yeah. And just did that because I enjoyed doing that, and so I started working building a satellite. Or developing a satellite and building it, and to me that was just natural. It was just a natural transition.
Yeah.
And so there was no plan per se, and so I started building the satellite. And then as you do this, I kind of changed a little bit on how I work. I came from the attitude control perspective, like I want to build the ACS system or attitude control system. And then I go, okay, maybe the power system is something I can do too. Maybe I can do telemetry too and stuff like that. So I kind of grew more on the system level. And then when I moved, the big step for me was actually moving to the US.
Yeah.
I got an offer here for 2 years on a visa to come over and do some analysis. Nothing really hard at the time, yeah. And so we did that, and my wife was actually a driver for that too.
Okay.
Because she really likes California, and and so we decided, okay, 2 years we can do that, yeah. And so we come over here for 2 years, and 2 years turn into more, and then more turns into, oh shit, we got to we got to either get a visa or get a green card, yeah. So let's get a green card, and then the green card turns into citizenship, and so on and so forth, yeah. It was just like, and all the time I was just working on stuff that I liked working on.
Yeah.
So I think the only good advice I can come up with is like, as long as you work on something that you like working on, that's actually fine. Yeah. If you find somebody who pays for that, that's even better.
Yeah.
And I've been really lucky in that aspect that I used to work on stuff that's not that common.
Yeah.
Maybe, yeah, and somewhat special, and people wanted to pay me for that.
Yeah.
And obviously, if you work on something special that's not very common, then your odds are slightly better. On the other side, working on stuff that's kind of not common is also more interesting for me.
Yeah.
So if I would be really interested in, whatever, making fries, the market would be a lot bigger, and I would not have maybe that success that I have if I'm rather interested in how the angular momentum of vehicles works, and stuff like that. So obviously, it depends also what you're interested in. But as long as somebody pays you for what you're interested in working on it, the odds are you're going to be good at that, and that kind of feeds, much in your career.
Yeah. Wow. This is really, really good. I want to kind of highlight what you just said for the listeners, and also combine it with what you were saying about your work being energizing for you, right? Like not necessarily needing recovery time from your work. Because what I'm hearing is you're saying there isn't a plan. You can't start right now and just go, this is where I want to end up, and then know all the steps to get there. But you can go, I'm going to do the work that's energizing to me. I'm going to do what's good for me and what I like.
I mean, it probably helps you if you have a plan a little bit. I mean, I do want to, whatever, I get to school, and then after that I want to work as an engineer, and this is the area. But I'd be flexible, I think. Yeah. Primarily, yeah. And more like, what drives your curiosity? What drives your interest? And I'm interested in whatever. Yeah. I like building PC boards or something like that. Yeah. And do that, and then obviously that can turn into a serious profession. Right. If you're good at that too. Yeah. And I feel like the fact that that I liked working on what I work on, and also just to mention that everything I worked on was really fun and great. Yeah. I mean, there are aspects of this whole thing like that really, oh man, they really need to write that thing. Yes. We SpaceX had a great way of actually dealing with that. We try to automate the stuff that we don't like. A lot, and so, but anyways, I mean, there's aspects obviously that you don't like to work on. You need to justify what you're doing and things like that. Okay, and you do that, but then you go back to the real thing. Yeah.
I have to ask, did you particularly enjoy working on like failure investigations, anomaly investigations?
Okay, that sounds a little bit weird, but
it's okay. So
yes, no. So I do have a little bit of a. I'm interested in that somewhat. Yeah. I want to find out if this fails, why did it fail?
Yeah.
And I think it's not just on the rockets and stuff like that. I had this with on airplanes. I look at the NTSB database, and there's some weird stuff in there. Yeah. And then you go, how do you get into this position, or how do you get into this this situation, and how do you get out of that?
Yeah.
Or in SpaceX's case, I thought some of them were interesting just because they're rarely like a simple thing breaking. They're mostly like this thing breaks and kicks off that thing, and then in combination we made that change over here, and suddenly it doesn't work anymore. Yeah. And this combination of factors was always interesting to me, from the aspect of A, finding it, and then B, preventing it in the long run.
Yeah.
How do you do this? Because obviously you can once you do a failure analysis, you can prevent this one failure. But what you want to do is you want to actually prevent this type of failures, or the underlying root causes are typically humans that make a mistake, and how do you keep these humans from making that mistake again? That's a little bit more tricky.
Is it more like systemic issues that tend to come up from it? And if you look at just the...
Yes, it can be systemic issues. It could also be that we completely never tested this because we never thought about this. And it applies not just to that, but to all of it.
Yeah.
So once the... I was actually... I was interested in what caused a failure, and then also interested in what does that mean? Yeah, what does it mean for the whole rocket? Can we do more than just fix this particular problem, but find other places? Yeah,
that's so good. Really, really important to see not just what was the acute cause, but what was the greater cause.
I mean, it's logical. If you one tire on your car is flat, why don't you look at the other three at the same time? Right? And don't forget the reserve, right? I mean, it's kind of
yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And we can kind of dive right into our technical topic of the delicate balance of mitigating risk versus pushing boundaries.
Yeah, I think this is a perfect one for you, and goes right off of that last question and dovetails into it perfectly. So you've been around SpaceX through thick and thin, and there was 5 different failures at SpaceX, 5 more significant ones that were launch failures. And that those 5 came in the first 34 attempts. So there's, and that's pretty normal. There's a lot of early failures for rocket companies. We just saw that more this beginning of this year. Since that 34th or so launch attempt, there's been over 170 straight successes. That's that's 98%.
Wow.
That's incredible. So what did you learn from those initial failures that drove such an impressive streak to follow?
So, okay, the 5 failures you mentioned were actually quite different.
Yeah.
The first 3 were with Falcon 1, and all of these 3 failures, in my opinion, were just what I would call design failures. We made an assumption and designed it that way, and the assumption was wrong. And we partly pushed a little bit the boundaries there.
Yeah.
We partly wanted to save weight. We partly, there were operational, I guess, issues with it too. It would have worked if you wouldn't have done certain operations at the time. Yeah.
Yep.
And so those failures, I think, are beginning failures, partly, I guess, design failures, I think, is the best for that. Yeah. And then after that, the 2 on Falcon 9 were different.
Yeah.
They were very different. First of all, they happened. It took us a while to find them, and then there were material issues, largely material issues, or materials that we used in the wrong way, or we bought the wrong parts with the wrong material, or didn't test them really properly. So it was like a multitude of. It was not a simple thing anymore.
Yeah.
It was a more complex thing where we had this could have happened 2 flights earlier. Or 2 flights later, and there's a randomness to it. It's not a total random failure still, Random failures are something on top of that, So the type of failures are very different. It's those are what I would call build failures,
Okay.
Or built and operational failures, where you make changes in the operation and bad things happen. So we did a couple of things following or learning from these failures. Number one is we looked very carefully at, are we missing, similar things on other places on the rocket?
Yeah.
Do we use anything not properly or don't test it, for example? Do we have untested things on there?
Yeah.
If we do we have enough margin on there? It's like a logical thing too, And then the other thing was, when we make changes, do we check for what do the changes cause? That's actually an interesting thing in general. In the beginning, you built this. I don't want to say you duct tape it together. Let's just say duct tape and zip ties are
we'll say it's just a metaphor.
and then as you continue building more and more rockets, you improve them and you make changes. And then that change suddenly does not work as well as the duct tape. And so every change needs to be looked at too, right?
Yeah.
And you need to look at that too. So this is basically what boils down to engineering rigor, and you need to have like a certain mindset, I guess, in the company, people need to understand that that's a problem, and because otherwise you have people start, and on the third week they make a big mistake and takes down the vehicle. You just need to ingrain this mindset of diligence and rigor into the company. Difficult thing because it's a culture thing. I struggled with actually what do you do to modify a culture a little bit, or change the culture even, and that's a difficult thing.
That's really good. What did you come up with?
Nothing really. No. I mean, you got to live it a little bit, You got to be. I was basically my department. The role of the launch chief engineer. That was the person basically everything rolled up to prior to a launch on a technical sense.
Yeah.
And then that would actually drive the rigor back into the departments. Yeah. If something would come up at the last minute, you would say, well, you should have done that like last week, and for the next time, I would basically grill people a little bit if they just make a change. And so over time, we would build up a system that communicates changes and communicates risks so that you're not surprised and that you can actually work them ahead of time. But it took some time.
Oh man, so good. So many directions I want to take this. But one of your earlier statements was that there weren't random failures. What is the definition of a random failure?
Random failure is the way something in your car or electronics computer fails.
Okay.
It's been tested and designed and it's good. It works 1,000 hours for you and 100 for you. Well, the part that failed is a random part failing.
Okay.
I mean, at the end of the day, it is maybe not a random failure.
Okay.
Electronic parts have a certain lifetime, and that's what I would call a random failure if they happen to run out of lifetime a little bit too early, and so on and so forth. True random failures, I've seen them, but they're pretty rare.
Yeah. Wow. So interesting. So let's see. What was your approach to identifying risks to the mission? Like, how can you system it?
I actually think that takes a team.
Yeah.
It's not a person, it's a team. And the reason it's a team is because we have different perspectives. Whatever. You have a propulsion background. I have an avionics background. And so we put this together and we find out what actually could cause trouble. And that's what we did too. We set together, you can come up with like a risk right away. Yeah. There's other ways to find that too. Like you talk to people and somebody pulls you aside and says, I've done this and then the work order changed and it's weird and is this a problem? Yeah. And then you would go hunt this down and find out if this is a risk or not. Yeah. Actually, those are the best in some sense.
Yeah.
And we would do this also. We would call for concerns in the beginning. And then the third way is to look at tests. So certain things get tested, and are there test failures? And if there's test failures, have those been run down to what actually is the root cause in this case? And if there is, then okay, there's parts that can fail early or something like that.
Yeah.
People sometimes it's like when you bring your car to the garage and something fails, right? They swap it.
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't solve the problem for me. I know it solves the problem for them.
Right.
I want to know what broke on that radio.
Right.
And obviously, I'm a terrible customer for a repair shop. Right.
Yeah.
Actually, I did this with my car. They changed the I want to say flight computer. The computer that's I think the entertainment. So, and I looked at the guy and said, "Do you not test them before?" And he looked at me like, "Are you crazy? Testing them? Why would I do that?" They come from the factory; they're fresh.
Yeah.
So, anyways, so these are the ways where you can basically get the risk, and then you obviously you write them down. You have a list and you rank them.
Yeah.
And sometimes your ranking is wrong, and then you work them from top down, basically, if you can. Sometimes that's also difficult, And people have perceived risk as different, People are sometimes really, really concerned about what they did for no reason, other than that they did it, and they're on the hook, right?
Right.
A little paranoid, maybe.
Exactly. But you want some paranoid, paranoid people, but you don't want people to be totally paranoid.
Right.
Yeah. And then other people make this really sketchy change, and it's gonna be fine.
Yeah.
And you go, well, how do you know this?
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
So there's very different levels of risk perception on people.
Yeah.
And you got to bring this on the same level. It's like I said, it's mostly a team effort because you need different perspectives, and it's also long term.
Yeah. That makes a
Wow.
lot of sense. That's really cool to hear.
Yeah, very, very valuable information here for people to be absorbing. So is there it's getting people in a room and talking about it, but is there a system or what process do you have for evaluating the risk? Like, how do you account for all those variabilities?
Yeah, I mean, NASA
perception?
and the Air Force and others have like a certain system, and they force you to basically guess a likelihood.
Okay.
And guess a severity.
Consequence?
Yeah, consequence is the one. And then that together gets severity. And then there's like a little matrix, and then the upper right part is red, and the lower left part is green, and the part in between is yellow. And then we turn this into equation.
Yeah.
It's not that hard. And then use equations and just blur the numbers a little bit.
Yeah.
But essentially, it's been around for a while.
Okay. Yeah.
And you're trying to basically balance that you have failures that are not impactful but very often,
Yeah.
and failures that are bad but don't happen very often. And you're trying to find where do I evaluate this the best? Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a way to deal with that. Maybe there's other ways. Maybe there's even better ways, but that's what's been done in the past couple of years.
Yeah,
we made a little bit of modification, but we essentially did not make a lot of changes there.
Yeah, it seems like a reasonably good system,
Yeah.
but you also mentioned that you had to use it. Do you think there is a better system out there? Or are there things that you wanted to change about how it was set up?
No, the changes we made, I can't talk too much. We actually we did, and so I think the problem is also a lot of this risk part is also communicating with your customer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And so you got to somewhat speak the same language.
Yeah.
At that time, or you have like a dual system, which is also not great. I always try to avoid any dual systems, but I also wanted to always honor what SpaceX thinks and us, and that's more important than and then also honor the customer to some extent and try to find a compromise there.
What do you mean by dual system?
Like whatever the customer wants to label the risk in A, B, and C, and you have like a 1, 2, 3, right?
Okay.
And then now you have a dual system.
I see.
I mean, this is
Okay,
a silly comparison, but
No, yeah,
but,
makes sense.
But there's something like that.
Yeah. Okay.
And when you're navigating this with customers and you're at SpaceX, which is trying to push the boundaries, move really fast, but also cares a lot about flying safely, how'd you draw that line of what risk was acceptable risk? And I'm also maybe curious to hear if the customer tended to agree or not.
Okay, I have so I have one example that works for me, and that's basically if I have a certain, let's say there's a certain risk or a certain issue, whatever it is, a problem, and then I ask myself, did I do everything that even if this fails, I can say I did everything I could?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And if the answer to that is yes, then that's it. If the answer to that is no, then the next question is, okay, so what do you want to do now?
Yeah.
And it has to be somewhat something you can do.
Yeah.
And then you do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. We did delay launches. We did do the same, right? I see we're gonna launch tomorrow because we need more time, and go okay.
Yeah.
And in many cases, that's just because there's concerns and people need to wrap their head around and do due diligence.
Yeah.
And it's perfectly fine. I'd rather have that than launches on time every time and then it goes wrong. Yeah.
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 So.
Wow. So did you find that you were able to mitigate most of these risks like pretty well beforehand, or were there times where it was pretty infeasible to mitigate them to the extent that you would like and also be pushing the boundaries that the company wants?
Good question. I have no idea how to prove this to you, because I would need two rocket companies. Here I mitigate risk and here I don't. Yeah? I don't actually know how effective that is because the other one blows up every third time or whatever it is. And I just don't know. I mean, it's
a hard question.
Exactly. And there's a little bit is in there. is what I'm doing actually useful at all? Yeah.
Yeah.
Or is this whole risk thing useful at all? Would we have done it anyways? Yeah.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. So that does play in. It gets a little bit. Sometimes you get some reward if something almost happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if this one almost happens and you see it and then you go, and then I mean, my memory isn't that great, but then other people would go, oh, that's that risk. I know exactly what it is.
Yeah.
And then you see, oh, okay, at least we got the risk right. Yeah.
Yeah.
we probably didn't mitigate it to completely avoid it, but
Right.
at least it didn't bring down the vehicle or something
Right.
like that.
Yeah.
So there are a few cases where that happens. It's not very often, and unfortunately, the real proof would be if you do it without,
Yep.
or if you do it with.
Yeah.
In another case.
We don't have multiple realities to look
I
at
love
right
people.
now.
People claim that it was successful because we never had a problem. Well, that doesn't mean that this whole risk management was actually useful, because you could have taken it away. It might have been the same thing, right? But okay, fundamentally, I do believe we did a lot of useful work. We did a lot of improvements. It also changed a little bit, I guess, the mindset of people.
Yeah.
And you get more and more people in the mindset where you go, okay, I think you got this covered. And that also meant for me that at one point in time, I'm not needed anymore. Yeah? Or my position is not that urgent anymore, or my job is basically done. Yeah. The system runs on its own.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like for Falcon 9, I mean, I have no information from the inside. I can only see from the outside. It looks like it's going well.
Sure seems like it.
Right. And I'm glad, and I'm particularly glad when it comes to the human missions.
Yeah.
I worked the last couple of years. I worked a lot in that, and that's a different thing. I did not expect that from me too. That I would say, oh, it's different, because I would treat. In the beginning, I thought I treat a satellite like, this is all I want to protect. And then I realized, well, I guess on the astronauts, especially if you know them, that's a little bit
imagine.
different.
Yeah.
Wow. So what mission were you most nervous for? There's been a lot of groundbreaking missions or high stakes missions over the years. What ones?
So I think at the
kept
early
you up?
missions, I was the most nervous, because
Yeah.
I just wasn't used to that. Over time, I calmed down. Most of the later missions, I would actually, when you can check your pulse,
Right.
Yeah.
everything,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
No change.
Wow.
But then again, and when we had the crew missions, those would be more exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and those would definitely keep you up a little bit. I sleep pretty well, but they would keep me up a little bit.
Yeah. Wow. Thanks for sharing that. So there's circling back a little bit to having the right culture to be able to talk about these risks, elevate them, mitigate them. There's a comic about launch where an engineer wants to report an issue in the final 10 seconds of the countdown, but the manager says, just relax and wait. And you keep seeing the countdown go down. And then at T-2, another engineer aborts the launch, and the manager says, you see, everyone would blame them now for the launch. So how do you foster a culture that encourages engineers to raise flags about potential risk well before T-2 seconds?
So, well, okay, I guess the comic is kind of weird, because I would still ask, what is your concern, and not necessarily the risk, right? I mean,
Sure.
that seems like the wrong answer per se. And we had always, not always, but we had some late incoming concerns in some launches, and then we would try to educate people, say, look, don't do this in the last minute. Give us a little bit more time.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can't avoid it. Sometimes something happens on the test side and it just feeds back that late. And then you would actually look at that and go, well, is that applicable here or not? And then we would have discussions. And in some cases you would say, okay, we got to stop. Or in some cases you say, I think it's not relevant here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a technical discussion at the end of the day, but it's not a hierarchical thing. But also people hiding behind other people, that is somewhat real. I mean, that happens when you build a house too, right? Or something like that. happens with everything where you have different teams working there, right? And you just got to know in the end, okay, I know exactly that they're just trailing the other people by like a millisecond.
Right.
Yeah.
on the schedule, yeah.
Wow. Really good stuff. So, I mean, I remember getting emails from leadership from yourself and from Elon that were reminding us of essentially this. Please don't wait till the last second. Please raise these flags early. Do you think that is a key part of building that culture, or is there other aspects to it that are really
if you ask for it, I think nobody can. So in many other, so the problem is a little bit, I don't know other industries,
You're right.
Yeah.
So one of the problems is I really never launched for I guess Boeing or Ariane or something like that. But I it's more hierarchical from what I hear.
Okay.
And things like that are a big deal.
Okay.
We don't make it a big deal. We work it, yeah.
Yeah.
And yes, I may go back to people and say this was really not good, and please come earlier the next time, yeah.
Yeah.
But it was not it had no impact on the person's career like it does have in other companies probably, yeah. And so we actually asked for it, and that is a big point. Elon asked for it, I asked for it, Quinn asked for it too, and everybody wants to know what's the problem, yeah, and not necessarily what's the success. I mean, what's the success is kind of like what comes out of it at the end, but you really want to know about the problems of what people have, and not so. Yeah, it's a different. I don't know.
Yeah.
To me, it's logical.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. What are the problems? Tell us early so we can try to get out in front of it, or at least learn early.
Like the weeklies, when you talk to somebody on a weekly basis, my main question was, what's the problem, or what are the problems of this week?
Yeah.
And then yes, you want to hear about successes too, but I care mostly about the problems.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good.
And you're acting as an advisor now that you're semi-retired.
Right.
So you're working with early.
So I'm not an advisor for SpaceX, right? just to be clear, I have no.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Previously, you were after you left
I was
for
a
the
little
moment,
bit.
right?
We just didn't know what to call the job.
Great.
And so we called it like senior advisor, and that's fine. Yeah. So I do work for. I'm on the board for two companies, Mynaric and OHB, which are German American and German, and then I work as an advisor more on the technical side for Vast and Vast Spaces. Actually, just moved to Long Beach here.
Cool.
Building a space station, and Stoke Space is in Seattle, building a completely reusable first and second stage. So those are the two. There's a couple other companies that I look into too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mostly related to electric propulsion on airplanes. And different topics. Yeah. But those two are where I do a little bit more.
Yeah. From your insights, especially into these earlier stage companies and what you're seeing, how are they doing? Not necessarily specifically those two companies or more, but in general, are you seeing that the approaches that they're taking to move quickly and break things is well balanced with?
Yeah, they all have, or most companies that come out of the SpaceX environment are hardware heavy.
Yep.
Yeah.
Most of them are building things and building things sometimes too early. And that's fine. I mean, that's what makes the iterations better.
Right.
Yeah.
You know?
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah. Wow. This is incredible. I feel like we could just continue talking to you forever about this. I want to be respectful of time. I know we're coming up on it here. So to wrap, Hans, thank you so much for everything that you've shared with us. This is wonderful. We feel so honored and privileged to get to speak with you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah,
very much.
real pleasure having you. Thanks
for having me.
Yeah. To the listeners, thank you so much for for tuning in to AdAstra With, where you get to hear from leaders of the new space and clean tech industries behind the scenes on their careers and technical topics. Thank you so much for tuning in to the stars.